Donor regeneration. The most controversial debate in the hair transplant industry, with Dr. Coen Gho, track 1 of 2. For well over a decade, few subjects in hair restoration have generated as much fascination, debate, and scrutiny as HST, donor regeneration, hair cloning. To some, it represents genuine innovation and a new way of thinking about donor management. To others, it remains one of the most questioned procedures modern hair transplantation has seen. Very few techniques have remained under this level of attention for so long. At the center of that discussion has been Dr. Gho, founder of the Hair Science Clinic. Now, after more than 20 years immersed in this industry myself, speaking with thousands of patients worldwide, documenting outcomes and visiting clinics globally, one thing I've learned is that very little in hair restoration is ever completely black and white, especially when innovation, hope, identity, and expectation all collide. But regardless of where opinions fall on HST, one thing is undeniable. Dr. Gho's work has had a major impact on the wider conversation surrounding donor limitations and the future possibilities of hair transplantation. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge something openly. Dr. Gho personally invited both myself and our team to visit his London clinic with a level of transparency and access that is genuinely rare within this industry. He has been willing to answer difficult questions directly, introduce patients openly, and allow us genuine behind-the-scenes insight into a technique that has been debated globally for years. In fact, through the Hair Loss Lab and Specs Hair, we hope to document a patient journey in real time moving forward, following the procedure, donor healing, recovery, and long-term progression through direct observation rather than marketing or speculation. And irrespective of where people stand within this debate, I believe that level of openness deserves respect. So firstly, Dr. Gho, thank you genuinely for your hospitality and willingness to have this conversation openly. And to be clear, this discussion is not about sensationalism, promotion, or discreditation. The goal is simply to create a calm, balanced, evidence-led discussion that helps patients better understand the realities, possibilities, and limitations of HST, because ultimately, behind every debate in this field are real people trying to make informed decisions about their hair, donor supply, and future. So with that said, Dr. Gho, for people watching this around the world who may have heard years of conflicting opinions surrounding HST, could you help break this down in simple, understandable terms? How does the procedure actually work? What is physically being extracted during surgery? And what fundamentally separates HST from conventional FUE techniques? And flowing naturally from that, one of the biggest discussions surrounding HST has always been the concept of donor regeneration. So in practical and realistic terms, patients can understand, what exactly do you mean by regeneration? What should patients genuinely expect to see in the donor area over time? And where do you personally believe the true strengths and limitations of HST sit long term, particularly regarding future donor reuse?
What we find out and we discovered is that the stem cells are not situated underneath the hair root, but on the sides. We also discovered that you don't need the whole follicle to get hair growth. Why we don't need the whole follicle? Because the aim of a transplantation is to transplant sufficient viable follicular stem cells to get hair growth. It's not more, it's not less. So, a hair root is a big hair root. The viable follicular stem cells are on the sides. So these follicular stem cells are the reason why it generates hair. So what we do, we don't extract the whole follicle, but we only extract a very small part of the follicle which contain sufficient viable follicular stem cells. We put it in the fertilizer. There it gets a backpack with all nutrients, oxygen, antioxidants, and everything to be implanted in the area. There it will develop a new hair follicle. Therefore, the part which is left behind will regenerate new hair growth. The parts which we implant will also regenerate new hair growth. So we make from one hair, two hairs, four hairs, three hairs, six hairs. It's so simple. It's like a plant. When you take out a little part of the plant, you put it somewhere else, put it in the fertilizer first, and you have two plants. We do it with hairs. Simple as that. Because we don't extract the whole follicle, of course, the major part of follicle is left behind. That will regenerate a new hair. So the part which we extract will also regenerate new hair. Because when we started this study, we already knew or revealed that it was not necessary to have the whole follicle. Why? We did studies for the minimal amount of tissue necessary to regenerate hair growth. And it did depend on the size of the hair follicle or the size of the tissue. It depends on the preservation solution. You have to remember that in 1995, we still use saline solution. But saline solution is as acid as you can be. It's even more acid as as your stomach. And you put your viable tissue there without nutrition, without oxygen, without nerve system. Of course, a major part of the follicle will go in apoptosis or programmed cell death. So what if we can preserve the tissue with our preservation solution, with nutrition and oxidants, everything what God forbid. So then it will, instead of just preserve, it will give a boost to these follicle stem cells to regenerating hair growth. It's because what we discovered in the years is that every time becomes more difficult to extract the same hair follicle or hair follicle stem of follicle unit. Why? Because we extract the core of the follicle unit, and the core will reproduce the new hair follicle of the new hairs. And when we again try to extract the same follicle unit again, or the same part of the follicle unit, of course, the morphology of the hair root is a little bit different already. So every time it is more difficult for the same hair root. But our record is 14 to 15 times in the same area, the same donor area. So we can harvest more than 10,000 to 20,000 hairs. We can use the same donor area for conservative treatments. And the record is 14 to 15 times the same donor area. But of course, when you extract every time the same follicle unit, so it is damaging the follicle unit. So what we give is a guarantee of at least 85% regenerate of the donor follicles. So after time, or after 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, as you've seen in some examples, is that of course there you see one of the little white spots, because those are not regenerative.
So the integrity of that follicular unit over time is hindered.
Yeah.
It is getting hindered
Yes.
over time.
Yes.
And on average, you're saying 3, 4, 5 times?
6, 7 times.
Okay.
Yeah. The limitation of the whole technique is the donor area. The aim of a transplantation is to make it as natural as possible, in such way that nobody will notice that you have been transplanted, not only in the front, but also in the donor area. Especially the Hollywood stars, Bollywood stars, they cannot afford to have the whole donor areas full of little white spots. But I developed this technique not for the Hollywood stars, Bollywood stars. I developed this technique for burn victims. Burn victims have a limited donor area. So we have to harvest every time in the same donor area to get them more decent and natural hairstyle.
So obviously, you've been performing hair restoration for a number of years, I believe since the early 90s. You'll have to correct me on the dates. But obviously, in that time, you performed countless amount of surgeries. And obviously, the kind of the kind of general consensus here is that the technique, there's some skepticism around the technique from other surgeons. Why you feel that is?
Because at that moment in 1995, 99.9% of all surgeons performed strip surgery. There, I'm coming from a scientific world, not a commercial world. And I'm presenting there a new technique for the people, not for the surgeons, for the people, the customers. Why? Because this is minimal invasive and this is far more natural than the strip surgery and doesn't leave any scars. So I was very, very proud that we developed this. So I presented this and then I said, well, everyone should be happy. Not. They were not happy.
We're going to pause this conversation here for now because there is still far more to unpack surrounding HST than could ever realistically fit into a single discussion. And perhaps that is exactly what makes HST such a compelling subject after all, not certainty, but the questions it continues to raise, because somewhere between skepticism and possibility sits the truth. And over the years, very few procedures in hair restoration have kept the industry searching for answers quite like this one. But this is only the beginning. And in the next chapter, we go deeper. Real patients, real donor analysis, real long-term observations, and a closer look at the claims, the criticism, the healing, and the realities behind one of the most debated procedures modern hair transplantation has ever seen. So, Dr. Go, thank you again for your openness, transparency, and willingness to allow this unique level of access. And to everyone watching, Track 2 is coming soon. I'm Spencer Stevenson, and this is the Hair Loss Lab podcast.